Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Today, more than 6 months after the insurrection with no real precedent in American history, a transfer of power marked by violence, not by peace, the President of the United States, the man who the mob tried to stop from occupying the office, came forward to say the country is facing a major crisis.
So hear me clearly. There's an unfolding assault taking place in America today, an attempt to suppress and subvert the right to vote and fair and free elections, an assault on democracy, an assault on liberty, an assault on who we are as Americans. We're facing the most significant test of our democracy since the Civil War. That's not hyperbole. Since the Civil War.
It's an incredibly powerful thing to say. I mean, he says it's not hyperbole, a kind of Bidenism, but I agree with him it's not hyperbole. Republicans are passing laws making it harder to vote in states across the country. Of course, they're using the predicate of the big lie to do so. Conservatives on the Supreme Court have gutted Sections 2, 4, and 5 of the Voting Rights Act. I mean, the country has basically only been an actual multiracial democracy in a recognizable sense since 1965, when the Voting Rights Act was passed. It's a very short history we've been working on. And the president made the case today there's an urgent problem. And again, he's right. Unfortunately, the solution to that problem, the path forward, all comes down to this question about whether Democrats will restore majority rule in the United States Senate. Do they use the power entrusted to the Democratic Party by the majority of Americans in the House and in the Senate, and by 8 million plus more voters, 81 million in total, to protect the basic fundamentals of American democracy by finding the votes, the unanimous 50 votes, to weaken or eliminate the filibuster and pass the agenda? Or do they let principles erode because of some frankly ridiculous, quasi-accidental, reactionary procedural norm that creates a status quo that's completely indefensible? That's the question. That's the choice. And despite his very strong rhetoric, President Biden did not mention the filibuster in his speech today. He was pressed by reporters after the event.
Mr. President, why don't you talk about the filibuster? Are you gonna? Are you gonna meet with the Texas Democrats? Are you gonna meet with the Texas Democrats?
When House Majority Whip Jim Clyburn, who helped pave the way for the Biden presidency, perhaps as much as any single individual, called for a voting rights carve-out on the filibuster, saying if you could make exceptions for nominees and reconciliation, you could make exceptions for legislation to protect fundamental constitutional rights. He's also suggesting the president is working senators behind closed doors, telling the LA Times today, quote, "I just don't think you negotiate these kinds of issues from the microphone. You do it much better from the telephone." And that may be true. I will tell you, I have no dog in the fight of how Biden and Senate Democrats come to get to consensus on getting rid of the filibuster and passing an agenda to protect voting rights, whether that's done in public or in private, or how best to move reluctant Democrats on the record opposing getting rid of the filibuster, including Senators Manchin and Sinema. Everyone's sort of throwing stuff against the wall to see what sticks. I don't know the answer to those questions. I'm not sure anyone does. Well, President Biden is right about the threats America is facing. And if Democrats are not going to address the filibuster, then the threats will only get worse. At least 51 Democratic members of the Texas state legislature have fled the state. They are now in Washington, D.C. They met today with Vice President Kamala Harris in the afternoon. And they're in D.C. instead of Texas because Republicans want to pass a bill that will make it even harder to vote in the state. Now, there is no filibuster in the Texas legislature, which is the case in most states. It's just majority rule there, right? And they're in the minority. They don't have the luxury of that supermajority threshold. So they're taking desperate, extraordinary measures that in some ways the filibuster, once actually represented in the U.S. Senate, to flee the state and break quorum. You need quorum to conduct legislative business because they think the threat to voter access in their state and Texas and democracy is so extreme. They've flown down to D.C., where one of the two houses of Congress does not function by majority rule, to go plead with congressional Democrats who do have control, majority control of the Senate, to use that control. I mean, think of it from their perspective. As Texas State Representative Jasmine Crockett said last night on our show, use the power you have to pass voting legislation to preserve and protect the right to vote across the country, please. And this points to something that I think is easy to overlook, but I think is really important to focus on, which is the fundamental asymmetry and unsustainability of the current status quo. Because state legislatures are, by and large, run by majority rule. And in states that control, Republicans can pass legislation to restrict the vote. Even in states like Georgia, where Joe Biden just won an election, where they elected 2 Senate Democrats. There's no filibuster in the state Senate. It's majority rule. But then, if you want to protect voting rights at the national level, well, then it takes 50 votes, 60 votes. And those votes are just not there because Republicans won't play ball. Not only that, think about this craziness. You know, the filibuster, as we say often on the show, it's not some sacrosanct, non-negotiable principle. It's changed over time. Indeed, I covered it changing. Back in 2013, Democrats got rid of it for most presidential nominations because Republicans were using the filibuster to make it impossible to fill courts and executive office appointments. That was a big deal. Republicans at the time said, you'll regret it. And in some ways, probably true. Donald Trump got to confirm a lot of judges. Historic judge confirmation rate. But that's just what democracy looks like. That's the way the cookie crumbles. One thing Democrats did leave in place back in 2013, right? They said, we're getting rid of the filibuster for all these nominations, but we want to retain the filibuster for Supreme Court justices. Made a certain amount of sense, although, again, what gets carved out, what doesn't, right? So Democrats, rightly furious at Republicans stonewalling Merrick Garland's Supreme Court nomination, remember, as soon as Trump and McConnell take over, the first thing they did was filibuster Trump nominee Neil Gorsuch. And what did Mitch McConnell do? Well, he just got rid of the filibuster of Supreme Court nominees. Done. That's it. We have control. We're not negotiating on this. We're going to use our power. And so what were they able to do? Install 3 Supreme Court nominees for lifetime tenure with 54, 50, and 52 votes, respectively. None of those are 60. So if you're keeping score at home, here's where things stand. Republican state legislators can make laws to restrict the right to vote with just a majority vote. The Supreme Court's already gutted the part of the Voting Rights Act that would have stopped them from doing that through preclearance. Democrats need 60 votes to try to protect the voting rights people fought for decades to achieve. But then Republicans also just needed 50 votes to appoint Supreme Court justices who have been and will continue to tear down the voting rights laws one after another. Well, this doesn't make any sense. I mean, put simply, the system right now is rigged against democracy, and it won't get better unless Joe Biden and all the Democrats in the United States Senate come together to use their power to fix it.